It was a remarkably happy and lucky life, I would think, in almost every respect. I had amazing, devoted, wonderful parents. I mean, my parents were extraordinary people, and I didn't merely just love them, I admired them. It was a real, enormous privilege to have the parents I did.
Mark Twain once wrote that if you tell the truth, you never have to remember what you said. Depending on who you ask, the investigation into the Rafay family murders is either an example of liars being caught red-handed or the very face of malpractice, deception, and manipulation. Either way, deceit is the name of the game. In 1995, suspects Sebastian Burns and Atif Rafay were arrested for the triple murder of Atif Rafay's mother, father, and sister. The main piece of evidence against them was not fingerprints, not DNA, not eyewitness testimony, but the pair's own words in outright confession. After almost a decade of awaiting their trial, they were sentenced to life in prison. Over the years, however, a steady minority has grown to support them and called into question the legitimacy of both the evidence against them and the tactic the police used to extract a confession. The story has been told multiple times, comprising many different points of view, and even as the public's perception of the culpability of Burns and Rafay has changed considerably, there remains a sharp divide in those who believe them absolutely guilty beyond reasonable doubt, and those who think their bright futures were stolen from them by an unethical sting operation and overzealous officers. For this reason, we're calling the case of the Rafay family murders the most controversial in true crime history. Glenn Sebastian Burns and Atif Ahmad Rafay were born in Canada in 1975 and 1976, respectively. The pair met in high school in Vancouver and quickly became close. After graduation, Sebastian was a pilot for the Royal Canadian Air Cadets, and Atif was a student at Cornell University studying philosophy of mind and computer science. His parents had moved to Bellevue, Washington, and were well respected in the local Pakistani community, being practicing Muslims. Atif and Sebastian have both been described as intelligent, arrogant, condescending, pompous, and also very bizarre. One teacher from high school likened Sebastian to the infamous Waco cult leader, David Koresh. Sebastian and Atif had vandalized the school yearbook one year in high school by slipping in coded language which levied insults at the staff. Suffice to say, the school was not pleased. The two boys have also been characterized as having strange views about the world informed by their love of philosophy, and especially that of Nietzsche. When they were living together in 1995, neighbors alleged that they had been harassed and physically threatened by Sebastian on multiple occasions. All in all, a fair amount of people had not great things to say about these boys, and they were certainly an odd pair. But the things that they were accused of and ultimately convicted of were so outlandishly barbaric that it almost seems hard to reconcile with having been enacted by any functioning member of society. This video will attempt to lay out all of the relevant information in a logical manner, giving fair play to both sides, along with some analysis along the way, but not any firm conclusions. In July of 1994, Glenn Sebastian Burns traveled from Vancouver, Canada to Bellevue, Washington to visit Atif Rafay, who was staying with his family during the summer. The two 18-year-old students were at the house for 5 days, and on July 12th, the pair decided to go out around 8 p.m. At 2 a.m. on Wednesday, July 13th, Sebastian placed the following 911 call.
I need an ambulance.
Okay. What's the problem there?
There's been some kind of break-in.
Okay, well, just calm down. What's the problem?
The two, my friends, his mom and dad, we think they're dead.
Just calm down.
I don't think it's safe here. We'll be outside.
Okay, go ahead and go outside.
Please, fast, okay?
Yes, they're on the way.
Okay.
They're on the way.
We'll be outside.
Okay, go ahead.
After the police arrived, they witnessed a horrifying scene in front of them. Atif's mother was dead on the floor at the front of the home. Atif's father, Tariq, was found dead in his bedroom. Lead Detective Thompson later reported that Tariq had likely been bludgeoned 40 to 50 times. Atif's disabled sister was still alive, barely clinging to life in her room. She would later die at the hospital. Police were immediately suspicious of the two. There was no sign of forced entry, and their behavior was read as being incongruous with the brutality that they had apparently witnessed. The boys seemed concerned that the supposed attacker was still in the building, but they had been spotted by neighbors sitting still and talking on the curb just outside the house. One of them even lit up a cigarette at the time. Police had noticed that boxes had been tipped over, as if a break-in had occurred, but it didn't look like anyone had taken anything. Sebastian's fingerprints were later found on those boxes. Police spoke to the boys all night, and the pair told them their version of events. Detectives obtained permission to check Atif's computer, and after taking in their clothes for testing, they checked their faces and bodies for any small trace of blood. None was found. Furthermore, the house turned up no bloody fingerprints, no bloody shoe prints, or any physical evidence which positively implicated the boys, except for blood on the bottom of Atif's pant leg, likely from when he walked into his sister's room. In the morning, the officers took them out to eat and brought them to a hotel so they could sleep. The following afternoon, the boys were interviewed again. Atif told the detectives that he had noticed his Walkman and a family VCR tape was taken. Detectives found it odd that he didn't try to help his disabled sister when he found her bleeding out in her room, but was lucid enough to remember which items were missing. When asked about this, he responded something along the lines of, "I don't know, there was nothing I could do. I don't even know how to put on a Band-Aid." He also told police that he was not close with his sister, and honestly, he found her gross. The detectives were taken aback by these statements, but eventually the interrogations ended and they left the boys alone to sleep in the hotel. In a move the police really didn't like, Sebastian and Atif left the Bellevue Hotel and went back to the Burns house in Vancouver. The next day, the funeral of Atif's family was broadcast on the news. Atif was enraged at the fact that he had not been informed by either his family or the detectives that the funeral was taking place on that day. He called the lead detective, Detective Thompson, and left an angry message, but he didn't hear back. Thompson himself was furious that the boys didn't tell him that they were leaving when he gave his contact info to them. Much has been made about the fact that Atif should have known that bodies must be buried within 3 days in the Muslim religion. While it is true that this is a part of the faith, it is reasonable to believe that Atif might not have known this, as he was not as religious as his parents and likely lacked knowledge of certain customs. As Atif and Sebastian stayed with the Burns family in Vancouver, the Bellevue police continued their investigation and checked out the alibis the boys had provided them. Employees at each establishment recognized them and confirmed that they were there at the times they said they were. The timeline goes as follows. After leaving at around 8:30, they first went to the Keg restaurant. They then left around 9:25. They attended the 9:40 p.m. showing of The Lion King at Factoria Cinema. Around 12:15, they drove to an all-night diner called Steve's Broiler. Around 1:45, they left the restaurant and tried to get into a nightclub called The Weathered Wall, but were turned down as it was almost closing time. You might have noticed that we didn't mention what time the pair left the movie theater, as this is the subject of contention in this case. Atif and Sebastian have always maintained that they stayed through the duration of the entire movie, but they were not seen after 10:05 or as early as 10, according to some sources.
Even though the boys were seen going to the 9:50 movie, there's no proof that they stayed.
Is there a way for these two boys to exit the theater without drawing attention to themselves, say during the movie?
Jose Martinez sold the boys movie tickets that night, and he showed us how they could sneak out from this theater.
Got this exit behind the curtain or the other one over there.
If they slip through this curtain, you're not letting any light into the theater.
Correct.
And up these stairs?
And out this exit door.
2 doors outside.
What we do know for sure is that the movie ended at 11:20, and the pair were not seen again until 12:15 at the diner. We will be returning to our timeline later, but for now, the events listed are the ones we will be working with. While the boys had returned to their native country, the Bellevue police were not buying their story and felt that the two Canadians were acting incredibly suspicious. The police were not exactly shy about their opinion that Sebastian and Atif committed the murders, and they spoke to press many times about how strange they found their behavior, even though there was almost no physical evidence linking them to the crime. One massive clue implicated them. When luminol was sprayed in the shower of the Rafay family home, it lit up and indicated a large quantity of Dr. Rafay's blood, meaning that the killer had showered after the murders. As luck would have it, all of the hairs in the base of the shower drain belonged to Sebastian. Shortly after the death of his family, the life insurance policies paid out to Atif, and the boys moved in with their high school friends Jimmy Miyoshi and Robin Puga. Detectives showed up at their house a number of times and even followed Atif to a memorial for his parents. All attempts by the police to investigate them were in vain, as the boys refused to speak to the authorities. This was until the RCMP got involved. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police, also known as the RCMP, is the central police agency in Canada, equivalent to the American FBI. In January, The Bellevue police met with the RCMP in Vancouver, and it was agreed that the RCMP would both assist the investigation as well as carry out their own. The Canadian authorities wiretapped their house, they wiretapped their phones, and they wiretapped their car. But this wasn't all. They also launched an extremely complex undercover operation called Project Estate. For most outside observers of this case, this is where the story truly begins. From the months of April through July, Atif, Jimmy, and most importantly, Sebastian would become entwined in a sting operation involving two RCMP officers named Al Hazlitt and Gary Shinkarak. These officers employed an investigative tactic pioneered by Hazlitt and another RCMP officer in the 1980s, known as Mr. Big, or simply the Canadian technique. Officers pose as mobsters who befriend the accused, in this case Sebastian, and small-step them into a false sense of security, where they feel as though they can tell the truth about anything, all while the RCMP records every single piece of evidence through hidden wiretaps. This is done with the sole purpose of eliciting a confession from the suspect. Since this technique is generally seen as coercive, it is banned in almost every country except Canada. While the RCMP has reportedly disposed of the original tapes, most of the important conversations are extant in books and documentaries.
This is Quimper's Hair Salon calling for Sebastian to confirm his appointment with Gregory tomorrow.
When this call was intercepted by the RCMP, they figured now was the right time to strike. On April 11th, the first undercover agent made contact with Sebastian. Outside the hair salon, Gary Shinkarak walked up to Sebastian and told him that he had locked his keys in his car and he needed a ride back to the hotel that he was staying at. Sebastian obliged, and as they hung out, he told him about his movie idea, which was about two youths who were unfairly targeted by a police investigation after one of the two main characters' families had been murdered.
They called it The Great Despisers.
We were worried that it would sound a bit nerdy because having the word great in the title makes it sound kind of nerdy. And if we'd called it, for example, just The Despisers, that would have been more unimpeachably cool. However, we decided to have the courage to stick with this nerdy title.
A little on the nose, but Shinkarak told him that he liked the idea. Sebastian needed money to create his film, so Shinkarak offered to introduce him to his boss, Mr. Big. Mr. Big was, of course, Al Hazlitt. Shinkarak brought Sebastian to a strip club where he met Al. Al made it clear to Sebastian that his business was criminal, and Sebastian would have to earn money by working for him. 2 days later, Shinkarak and Hazlitt gave Sebastian the job of driving what he thought was a stolen car belonging to the wife of the boss of a rival crime syndicate. The mission was to break in and drive it 2 hours to a different location. Initially, he was flushed with nervousness at the prospect of doing so, but he quickly acquiesced. Later, he chastised the criminal bosses for not giving him enough money and not planning the crime out enough in advance. He told Shinkarak that when he and his friends committed crimes, they would plan meticulously and make sure nothing would go amiss. Shinkarak asked him what he meant, to which Sebastian smiled and replied, "Never mind." Sebastian later denied this and said he was referring to shoplifting when he mentioned committing crimes. This remark from Sebastian began a long pattern of somewhat cryptic, sometimes ridiculous, and always self-incriminating statements. In the following weeks, Hazlitt and Shinkarak were busy with other RCMP projects and did not contact Sebastian past a message left on his answering machine by Shinkarak on April 29th. Sebastian then called the hotel the two agents had been staying at, leaving multiple messages trying to get the two to contact him, voicably concerned they wouldn't speak to him again. He even dialed the hotel operator to ask if Hazlitt and Shinkarak were still at the hotel, to which the operator responded that they were. Sebastian hung up in frustration. All of that took place in one day, and Shinkarak got back to him on April 30th. During this encounter, the mobsters flashed handguns and implied that someone in their gang had recently murdered someone with one of the handguns. Sebastian would later credit this moment as the time he felt he should leave the group. After admitting to being the main suspect in a triple homicide in Washington, Sebastian told them that he couldn't risk being involved in a criminal organization. Hazlitt assured him that their organization was tight-lipped and careful. He told them that he had killed someone, and Shinkarak had covered for him by murdering an eyewitness before the trial. Sebastian at first doubled down on his apparent exit from the group. He was too busy. Then he did a complete 180 and mentioned that he would be interested in working with them in the future if they needed help getting people killed or stuff blown up. Shinkarak pressed him, and Sebastian added that he was dead serious. He couldn't seem to stop himself at this point and made more incriminating statements, adding that he wouldn't mind trafficking drugs or laundering money, and once again adding that he would have, quote, no dilemma about killing someone. But he doesn't know much about shooting guns, and he's simply too busy to become a hitman. 2 weeks later, Shinkarik met with Sebastian and Jimmy Miyoshi. Hazlitt wanted them to assist him in money laundering. The boys went around in town and deposited money into various banks, after which Shinkarik paid them each $2,000. Sebastian asked Hazlitt twice about what the police department had on him during this encounter, and Hazlitt told him that he had a mole in the Bellevue Police Department and he would let him know soon. After the two agents left, the hidden microphone picked up the following interaction.
Wow, so cool. This has been a cool thing ever. I've been hot for this one.
Sebastian and Jimmy met with Hazlitt to assist with more money laundering. Sebastian told Hazlitt that he believed his phone was tapped. Hazlitt pressed Sebastian for details so he could properly ascertain what information the police had against him, but Sebastian resisted his questioning without outright denying that he did the crime. At one point, he paused for a whole minute before saying, the ways of the police are, the way they've decided that I'm a murder suspect and anything I say could end my life. Sebastian told Hazlitt that he wanted to know what the police had on him, but he didn't want to say anything else. He told Hazlitt that he had read about undercover officers extracting confessions through sting operations in a newspaper. It's about a man charged with murder based on boastful confessions they say to, police officers disguised as mafia and undercover bikers. Hazlitt responded, "What are you accusing me of right now? First of all, what are you asking me if I am?" Sebastian said, "I'm not accusing you of shit." "Answer me this. Why did you guys do this? Money?" "Why do you want to know?" "Because I just want to know. I want to know what kind of guys I'm going to be working with. You can answer that. That's a simple fucking question. You know you did it. The police even fucking know you did it. We'll take care of the police. I want to know for the peace of fucking mind." "I'm not a weirdo," Sebastian said. "I'm not some sleazy, super violent guy. I'm not some philosophical weirdo, dude. Listen, the way you're asking me this, it's like you're a cop." "I don't give two fucks what I'm like," Hazlitt responded. "It's on my mind, and I want to know why." Sebastian went on to lecture Hazlitt about Nietzsche's eternal recurrence before the conversation returned to the matter at hand. Hazlitt asked Sebastian if he could kill again in the future, and Sebastian replied that he doesn't want to because, quote, "it would be very fucking brutal. It's fucking making me an old man, and my hair falls out, and my face is aging." Hazlitt asked Sebastian if he had any fear. I fear having a really shitty life, and I guess what I want to do is have a really great life. A good life takes money. I know that's why I ended up doing in Bellevue." Sebastian stopped talking. Their meeting had gone on for nearly 4 hours, and having felt that he had pushed Sebastian enough, Hazlitt scheduled another meeting for later. Jimmy and Sebastian talked to each other in the hotel after the investigators had left. The two talked at a whisper, which was undetectable to the hidden wiretaps.
Reading the estate file. So you've been reading the paper lately? Yeah, most of it. What do you think?
Al met with Sebastian again, and this time he showed him a fake memo from the Bellevue police, which detailed the evidence against him, but also stated that they are getting ready to file charges against the two boys as soon as Sebastian's DNA was done being processed.
Well, I'll tell you, they're coming to lock your ass up. There's your friends. I'm gonna show you something. You never fucking saw this from me.
Red bag of ice, nice shower there, makes it burn his hair. I mean, that could have been almost from any time. You know what I mean? I can't say that.
Obviously, they're referring to the murder, right?
Well, no, but what I'm saying is that that could have been there from 2 days before, even. It didn't sound like it.
Yeah, but hold it. The night you showered after the murder, did you wash yourself those red towels?
I don't even know.
What do you mean you don't know?
So I don't know.
Huh?
I don't remember what fucking color the towels were there. Bloodstains located in the garage. I don't know shit about bloodstains in the garage.
I don't know. You were there. If I knew, I could fucking probably tell you. I don't know, and I can't start asking all these questions.
Yeah.
Until I fucking know. And that's the bottom line.
Well, okay, but I mean, there is this possibility that there can be things that I don't know about that they're basically fabricating to look like They count, you know what I mean?
I don't believe they're sending a report to the lab or wherever this report is, asking to fabricate fucking evidence.
And and you guys get freaked out, and there's something that I can't help you with, like some stains on washer from the washer. I don't know what the fuck that is.
Listen to me. I got a way it's all gonna be set up to take care of the lab. You see what I'm saying?
Well, I want your help.
Yeah, you need my help. So, you tell me what went on down there, and I'm gonna tell you how I'm gonna take care of your problem.
Al urged Sebastian multiple times to tell him what happened, and the mole could make all the evidence disappear from the Bellevue Police Department.
Basically. Essentially, yeah, I mean.
How did you do 3 people at once?
Not at once, just when I did that.
Why'd you fucking do the dirty deed?
Dirty movie.
See, you left that out. See? I'm trying to check up on things. You didn't tell me that. You left the movie. You left you in a movie?
Sorry, I thought you would have known that. I just take it for granted.
No, I didn't take fuck off for granted. So it's just about the shower.
Like it's shower, clean off, blood and that kind of stuff.
So how do you know these weapons? What would you use?
That.
Okay, how'd you know they didn't find it?
Well, I don't know, but pretty early on they kept saying that they hadn't found a murder weapon yet. They kept saying that in the press and stuff and whatever. They kept saying they hadn't found a murder weapon yet, and that could be just some front or something. But
they're not gonna find your clothes. Is there blood on your clothes?
No, there was clothing on him.
There was no blood on him? How do you fucking, it's on a baseball bat. You have to shower and have no blood on you.
Dude.
Well, fuck, see, I didn't know that either. Fucking, you're old and fucking they gotta be thinking.
Yeah, well, you're saying to me like, oh, well, what do I need to know?
Well, yeah, I wanna know. I don't give 2 fucks if you did naked. I'm just thinking smart. There's little details like that are gonna fuck us up in the end. You see what I'm saying? You see why I get a little pissed off? Because I can't afford fuck-ups.
Okay, actually, I just remembered one thing. Sorry. I had a gun.
Great. Where are those guns? Out the fucking boxer shorts out in the dryer or whatever they're talking about there?
Definitely fucking.
Where'd you guys get the baseball bat?
I think it was like just kicking around or something.
You can go buy it in the store down there where they can trace it back to you guys? No? How solid's the teeth?
Solid, man.
Yeah? Oh, you're not gonna fucking break down after and say, oh, fucking Sebastian.
Jesus Christ. Ow, man. How long do you think we've been doing all this stuff? Dude, we, like, this, I do not think that anything that's gonna happen to us now is gonna compare to the fucking, it was quite intense around those days. I mean, we just sit around and feel kind of sick just all the time. You know what I mean? Because, like, it was just rough and, like, I mean, whatever. I mean, those would be the days. Like, cops were saying to us fucking face, like, gee, we know that you know who did this or that you know something about it. You're not telling us and stuff. I'm like,
I'm gonna meet him before too long, I'll tell you that right now. Because when we have this plan in motion, I'm gonna make sure that cocksucker is solid. I mean fucking solid.
well, I haven't told him about it yet. But
Well, no, we'll tell them together.
The next day, Al had Sebastian call Atif to the hotel room, and Atif corroborated Sebastian's confession, describing roughly the same sequence of events. Atif had stayed downstairs while Sebastian murdered his mother with a metal bat, but not watched as Sebastian killed his father and sister. He also stated that he had intentionally removed the VCR machine and Walkman to make it appear as a burglary. They then drove to different dumpsters in the area and got rid of the murder weapon, as well as the clothes Sebastian and Atif were wearing when they committed the crime.
Is your business life?
You and Sebastian are in a little bit of trouble. Crack. You and him are so close to going to jail right now. It's fucking unreal. And I know that because of different things I know and I've read. Who chose the bat?
I can't usually did. I assume most of this was.
Why would you get fucking 22? Pop, pop, pop.
Tell where to get firearms. Tell us where to buy it back, man, and, sponsor and all this crap. Man, I'll tell you something else, okay? One thing that we didn't know. Gunshot residue test immediately after. It was pretty bad. I guess you may know about that, but, at the time, I was starting to introduce that concept when I did the test on it.
Jimmy's another guy. What does Jimmy know about this? What happened in the States? Tell me.
1 week later, Jimmy Miyoshi was brought in to establish what the RCMP officers felt was a conspiracy to commit murder. Jimmy was clearly wary at this point that Hazlitt and Shinkaruk were undercover officers. But in order to satisfy them as best he could, he gave very cryptic answers and spoke quietly.
What I like about you so far is that when they were going down to the States, you didn't fucking rat them out.
Nothing to write about.
What? You could have ratted them out.
Huh?
You could have ratted them out.
I'm just saying that. There's nothing to write about.
He basically just wants to know, to confirm with you, I guess. Did you know, what, was going to go on in the States kind of thing?
Oh, you talk to Brian.
It's not gonna work.
Jimmy, I know that I can trust you with my life. You know what I mean? He doesn't know that, right? Okay, and so if you explain, yes, I knew that in advance. I didn't say shit to anybody, okay? It just shows that basically, you didn't fuck me up.
So did you know about it? Huh?
You want me to speak louder?
No, I don't speak loud. You're sitting there like you're a little fucking puppy dog. Okay, do you know who killed the parents?
Yeah.
Who?
Is that what you want?
Yeah.
And I just want you to explain to me exactly the purposes of you wanting to know. Is that so we can establish this kind of...
Totally for trust.
Totally for trust?
Totally.
Okay. Yes, I do.
Okay, who did it?
There.
Yeah, Sebastian, I knew that all along, so you're not fucking telling me something I don't know.
Just over a year after the death of the Rafays, Sebastian Burns and Atif Rafay were arrested and charged with the triple murder of Atif's entire family. From this point, Sebastian and Atif were in custody for years, waiting extradition to the United States. During this time, Jimmy Miyoshi fled to Japan and changed his name. Sebastian, in jail, slept with his original defense attorney. Yes, seriously.
A female lawyer in Seattle is in trouble for having sex in jail with her client, who is a murderer. How creepy is that? Huh? Sex with a lawyer. Ooh.
Canada's Supreme Court fought hard for assurances that the King County prosecutors would not seek the death penalty. After 9 years behind bars, it was finally agreed that the boys' maximum sentence would not include capital punishment. A huge win for Sebastian and Atif, no doubt, but unfortunately, the confession would be included in the trial. Despite it not being legal in the United States, this sting was carried out in Canada, and thus would be allowed under international treaty. Not a good omen for the boys. Regardless, they were going to plead not guilty. Sebastian's initial defense team's attempt at accounting for the bad optics of the RCMP's videotapes was to enlist DEA agent Michael Levine as an expert witness.
If you looked at the video, Burns is doing typical criminal braggadocio. Now let me break off here for a second. Criminal braggadocio, I'll use a case, for example. DEA headquarters asked me to play Mr. Big in an undercover sting operation targeting corrupt DEA agents. I posed as Mr. Big, a mafioso, met one of these DEA agents, and he so wanted to impress me that he said things on camera that would have gotten him indicted for homicide or conspiracy to murder, like Burns. Only this is an experienced DEA undercover agent, not a 19-year-old. And the reason I say that is to show you how vulnerable people are in the right situation to brag, even though it's a lie. Criminal braggadocio is common as dirt.
While it's true that people do sometimes brag about things they haven't done just for furthering social status, it's far from a recognized legal or scientific phenomenon. Either way, on account of Sebastian having sex with his attorney, he was assigned new representation who felt that a more proper defense is as follows. Sebastian was an ambitious teenager who had been falsely accused of a crime he did not commit, without a job and without a community. When a group of mobsters offered him an opportunity, he took it. However, he quickly realized how dangerous these men were, and he would say anything to convince them that he was a real criminal and could hang with the best. Sebastian became afraid that the mobsters thought he would rat them out, and he couldn't afford to do anything which would jeopardize their relationship. In turn, he acted how he thought a criminal associate should act, going along with the crimes and being an accomplice. This has been referred to as the fear defense, and has been frequently invoked by Sebastian when later questioned about his involvement and dealings with Hazlitt and Shinkarak, as well as Atif when talking about the confession. While the fear defense holds up remarkably well at specific moments, the overall picture one gets of Project Estate is that Sebastian was very, very happy to be involved. During the trial, over 100 witnesses took the stand, including damning testimony from Jimmy Miyoshi. He had flown in from Japan.
What did Atif tell you when he discussed what had occurred at the time of the murders?
I remember him telling me after his mother was struck that he went and got the VCR while Sebastian had gone into his father's bedroom. And when they had left that, his sister was, I guess, still alive.
The court case lasted for months, but eventually, all jurors found Sebastian and Atif guilty beyond a reasonable doubt.
All rise for the jury.
We, the jury, find the defendant, Glenn Sebastian Burns, guilty of the crime of murder in the first degree as charged in count 1, verdict form 1F. We, the jury, find the defendant, Atif Ahmed Rafay, guilty of the crime of murder in the first degree as charged in count 3.
Due in no small part to the videotaped confessions the boys had given the undercover officers. With that, Bellevue's most infamous murder case came to a close, and the maximum sentence was handed down to each of the two defendants, closely mimicking the script the boys had been working on almost 10 years earlier. 2 convicted killers getting the harshest sentence possible. In the movie, the death penalty. In the real world, 3 life sentences each, with no possibility of parole. Real-life justice and figurative poetic justice had been served. Except for one thing. In Sebastian's movie, they are falsely accused. Sure, they pled not guilty and always maintained their innocence, but a mountain of evidence contradicted their stories, and they had confessed in entirety. Over the years, however, a steadily growing group of activists, true crime fans, and documentarians have become staunch supporters of the two boys' innocence, not least of which include Sebastian's prolific and expensive Ivy League-educated attorneys, who believed in him so vehemently that they took on the difficult case at public defender rates, far below what they would usually charge. 2018's The Confession Tapes dedicated 2 episodes to illuminating the argument for innocence instead of the usual 1 episode that it allotted for other cases. The essence of the show is exploring controversial cases where a questionable or coerced confession is what led to the defendant or defendants getting convicted. It might sound like a stretch that anyone would believe them to be innocent after they admitted to the crime. So let's look at some of the main talking points that have been put forth by the confession tapes and other advocates over the years. The main piece of evidence that ultimately sealed the boys' fate was the confession to the undercover officers, which is understandable considering that most people believe they would never confess to a crime they did not commit. In recent years, however, many American police tactics have come under fire for being potentially catalytic in creating false confessions, such as the Reed technique, polygraphy, and the legal right of police to lie about evidence. Despite all of these potentially dangerous techniques being allowed, the undercover operation utilized by the RCMP is actually illegal in America. We feel that this speaks volumes about the reliability and safety of this operation. Though the RCMP insists that Mr. Big stings can clear suspects of any wrongdoing, they have been known to generate false confessions before.
I will not say I did it. When I didn't do it, I didn't do it, that's it.
But on screen, Al Hazlitt as Mr. Big seems unmoved.
Go downstairs to the lounge. Have one fucking beer, think of this over. So I'm not gonna come back off and say I killed him.
Watch what happens next. Rose returns not from 1 beer, but 2 hours in the bar, and apparently from being coached on what to tell Mr. Big to get his help. An undercover officer suggests to him it must have been his drunken alter ego, who they call Andy 2, who committed the killings.
Is that true, Andy? Yep. Yeah. I need your help. Well, and maybe I was blocked out. I was Andy 2, right? Mm-hmm. Get your help or what? Well, please. Well, we'll go with I did, okay? Did you walk those two people? Yes.
Clearly, however, none of the wiretap statements made by Sebastian look very good for his case. And that is compounded by the fact that because of the fear defense, Sebastian has to essentially double down on this legal strategy continually, even when the original defense fits the scenario better. But even though it looks bad, Sebastian was being brought to task by one of the pioneers of the Mr. Big technique. In a situation which was designed to lure Sebastian into a false sense of security, it was highly manipulative. The two agents, Hazlitt and Shinkarak, posed as extremely violent men and said and did many things which would constitute an implicit threat, something which goes far past the bounds of normal police procedure. Finally, he was shown the fake memo from the Bellevue police, which made it clear that if he did not admit to it, he was going to be prosecuted, even if he was innocent. Despite the numerous factors which could be argued to parallel a stereotypical false confession, expert witness Richard Leo was prevented from testifying for the defense, with the given reason being that his research focuses on false confessions in police station settings, while the Mr. Big sting constituted a different situation entirely. The trial court also stated that jurors just don't need an expert to tell people if someone is afraid or not. Of course, despite the inherent danger of coercive investigative techniques, these operations can and do often result in true confessions, which has led many people to take a second look at the specific details of Sebastian and Atif's conversation with the undercover officers. Pausing for a moment, you would, at this point, be forgiven for scoffing at the idea that these two confessed murderers who partook in organized crime could possibly be innocent. But if allowing for the possibility that the police got the wrong people, other evidence starts to fall neatly into place. Sebastian's story about telling the mobsters what they wanted to hear seems to match up better in places than the idea that the pair really committed the murders. First of all, when asked basic questions, the story is changed multiple times. Atif seems pretty uncomfortable with the whole process, and at one point says the following.
Why did you do this?
Well, I guess the reason we did anything was to, set ourselves up so we could, become phosphorus and stuff.
Don't be embarrassed about it. Everything I do.
If there ever was a statement that sounded like giving someone what they wanted to hear, that was it. There were also many inconsistencies with the confession.
There are statements there. Yeah. Sister.
Sister who basically, was standing up and walking around or whatever.
Sebastian initially indicated that he had thrown out the clothes he was wearing when they did the murders, but that quickly changed to him doing it while naked, which later changed to him wearing underwear. He says at one point that the murder weapon had been in their possession for some time, but Atif later says they bought it at a store recently.
Where'd you guys get the baseball bat from?
I think it was just kicking around or something.
You can go buy it in the store down there where they can trace it back to you guys.
Back. It was bought. We're both
Jimmy Miyoshi's confession barely added anything of note, and all of the admissions contained practically zero info, which was not public knowledge or would have been known only to the killers. Not only is the confession inconsistent with itself, but it appears to be inconsistent with the available forensic evidence as well. The state's theory of the crime, and what Sebastian had told Hazlitt, is that he had done the killings in nothing but his underwear, with Atif standing far enough away to avoid getting blood on him. This way, he could shower and wash off both his body and the bat he used to kill the family. After this, they supposedly drove around town and disposed of the murder weapon as well as the clothes they had been wearing. At the time of the 911 call, not only were the boys wearing the same clothes they had been spotted in earlier that evening, but tests revealed not one drop of blood in the car. Perhaps Sebastian had washed off the murder weapon, leaving no blood on it, and then thrown his underwear in the washing machine instead of bringing it with him in the car. Indeed, tests were carried out on underwear that was in the Rafay family washing machine. The result? 0 blood. The boys changing out of and then back into clothes that they had been seen in earlier while they did the murders? Plausible or likely, given that they really are guilty. But no blood anywhere on Sebastian and none in the car? Seems unlikely enough to make you pause and reconsider. Even the hairs in the shower mixed with Dr. Rafay's blood don't seem as damning when you remember that Sebastian had been at the Rafay house for days before the murders, so it wouldn't be surprising at all to find his hairs in the drain. In 1985, psychologists Saul Kassan and Lawrence Reitman identified 3 types of false confessions. Voluntary, where the suspect confesses falsely without coercive techniques. Coerced compliant, where the suspect confesses as a result of the mounting pressure of a long and tedious interrogation. And coerced internalized, where the pressure makes the person actually believe they committed the crime. Thinking back on the nature of the undercover operation, viewing Sebastian and Atif's admission to the officers as a coerced compliant confession actually makes a lot of sense. The fake organized crime gang may have been appealing to him because he had been ostracized from public life as a result of media accusations and rumors. While it can be hard to ascertain the true rate of false confessions, there are a surprising number of examples which run counter to the idea that no one would ever confess to something they didn't do. Multiple studies have listed coercive interrogations, often held for absurd lengths of time, as being one of the leading causes of false confessions. Since 1989, the Innocence Project, not to be confused with other Innocence projects mentioned later, has exonerated 130 people imprisoned for murder. Out of the 130, a staggering 62% had falsely confessed to the crime. Since proving that a false confession occurred requires that the government fully admit their mistake, it is hard to say how common false confessions really are. Obviously, the same applies to the Mr. Big technique.
Al Hazlitt, the veteran Mr. Big himself, insists the sting tactic has never resulted in a bad conviction.
But I'd like to ask you this. Do you know of anybody in jail today that has confessed falsely in a Mr. Big UC scenario and found guilty?
This may strike you as a fairly obvious catch-22, as the main evidence which has put the accused behind bars is the confession. If they confessed, then they are guilty, and per Hazlitt's thought experiment, we just shouldn't worry about those who didn't end up behind bars.
If there is, I tell you, I'd be the first that I'd like to know about it, and I would definitely talk to you about it further.
You should know about it because you were involved in it. Mr. Rose confessed and was
He's
convicted.
Not in jail. I'm talking
sorry,
about somebody
he was released.
In jail today.
You asked me the question, I'm answering it. He wasn't released because the confession wasn't utilized. He was released because of DNA evidence and somebody else confessing.
The very fact that there was such close calls should give you serious pause about the validity of his assertions. Not only was the boy's confession inconsistent with itself, but it was inconsistent with several other pieces of evidence. During the trial, the state's own expert on blood spatter testified that the bloodstains in Dr. Rafay's room were consistent with 3 attackers. Sebastian's confession only made mention of him being present in the room, while Atif was downstairs.
So we have killer number 1 moving the pillow. We have killer number 2 bludgeoning Dr. Rafay with the bat. And then we have killer number 3 who has to remain in the exact same place throughout the entire duration of the attack on Dr. Rafay.
The expert witness determined that Basma had never been standing up, walking around as Sebastian attempted to club her to death, despite Sebastian confidently asserting the exact opposite. He also mentioned that there were no smudges on the wall consistent with the attacker wearing gloves, while Sebastian had claimed to be wearing gloves. Blood spatter is an extremely contentious topic, and it has its fair amount of detractors. But the fact that the state called an expert with contrary findings to testify in the proceedings tells you a great deal about how little forensic evidence there is against the 2 teens. Other evidence inconsistent with the confession is the presence of a fingerprint on the shower door and DNA in the base of the shower mixed with Dr. Rafay's blood. 2 bloodstains were also located in the garage, of which 4 DNA profiles were developed. One was Dr. Rafay, and the other 3, quote, contained a mixture of male and female DNA from at least 3 persons. The state expert reported that it was probably DNA from unrelated people who had been in the house before. However, it seems strange that there would be blood from Dr. Rafay in that location in the first place, as neither confession from the boys mentioned anything about the garage. Also, on the back of Dr. Rafay's neck, there was an injury consistent with a sharp blade, indicating that a knife was also used to attack him, a detail also curiously absent from the confession. A dark, coarse hair of an unidentified male was found in Dr. Rafay's bed where he had been killed. And finally, 6 weeks after the murders, 2 cigarette butts belonging to an unidentified male were located in the backyard of the house. None of these pieces of physical evidence were ever matched to Burns or Rafay, but it seems the investigators were unable to match DNA between the samples taken. Atif and Sebastian were painted as being emotionless at the scene of the crime, but early police notes actually described them as being extremely shaken up at what they had apparently witnessed. The pair had chased down the police cruiser that was dispatched to their location, banging on the window as the responding officer had mistakenly driven a few houses past the Rafay residence. The only oddity noted by the original responding police is that when the boys had been told to calm down, they seemed to quickly flip into a more reserved and less agitated state. Even so, it's not exactly the picture of the ruthless killers that had been widely circulated in the media. But of course, Atif certainly said strange things in the interviews, such as stating that he found his sister gross just hours after she had died. That's certainly strange, but that's about as much as you could realistically say about it. That is strange. Science has long shown that people can have wide and varied responses to shock and grief. It's easy for police to pick up on anything they perceive as guilty behavior, when in reality, the suspect's strange mannerisms can often be explained by the immense trauma that they are experiencing. If Atif really did help commit this brutal crime, why would he say something so obviously incriminating? It looks bad, but it might fit more in line with someone shaken up to the point of not being able to form coherent sentences, something observed throughout the initial interviews with Atif and Sebastian.
I found my mom. What did you do? I may have gone up to her. I can't remember. I don't know what I did. Can't remember.
Did you go walk over to your dad?
I don't think so. No.
Did you touch your dad?
I don't think so.
Well, you'd know, though, wouldn't you?
Yeah, I don't know if I know, but I don't think I did.
Furthermore, although the two teens did leave the Bellevue Hotel without telling the lead investigator, Sebastian's parents had phoned the Canadian consulate, who called the Bellevue police, which confirmed that the boys were free to leave whenever they wanted. Detective Thompson was not personally notified by either the suspects or the police department itself. When they went back to Canada, their insistence on avoiding the media and detectives was because they were already being treated as the guilty party. Sebastian's father had contacted a lawyer who advised that the boys not speak to detectives at all. The two teens decided to follow the advice. Guilty or not, they absolutely made the right decision. And speaking of lawyers, Jimmy Miyoshi testified against the two only after being threatened with a conspiracy charge and extradited to the United States. It seems reasonable that he would say whatever the prosecution wanted him to in order to avoid being convicted and possibly getting executed.
With the time that you were living in Ontario going to school, and then the time when you moved to Japan, there was a total of about 6 years where nobody contacted you about this case.
Yes.
And when this case came back into your life, it ended up touching your job, didn't it?
Yes, eventually it did affect my job.
And it was clear to you that if you refused to come here and testify, your company would find a reason to fire you in the immediate future.
That's what I believed, yes.
And I'll ask if this is a copy of an email that you sent to Mr. Conant, the King County prosecutors. In the first paragraph, sir, did you state the following? I did not believe you had it in yourselves to damage careers that my wife and I have worked considerably hard to rebuild from our situation almost 10 years ago. I am not sure what we have to live for at this point, and I am not convinced that we can ever recover from this. Did you write that?
Yes.
July 31st, 1995, I'm going back to that day you were arrested. One of the things they were telling you is that you could go to jail if you didn't say Sebastian and Atif told you about the murders. And Sergeant Wren confirmed that for you. He told you, hey, we'll reopen our conspiracy to commit murder case against you in Canada if you don't come and testify consistent with your immunity agreement. That's what he told you, right?
Possibly, yes.
You recall saying that Atif told you his sister was alive when they left the house after attacking the family? You said that yesterday, didn't you?
Yes.
It's the first time in 8 years that you have ever said anything like that, isn't it, sir?
I probably have mentioned things like that, but not necessarily in those statements.
You're making it up as you go along, sir. That's why you're saying things for the first time yesterday.
No, I don't believe I am.
You actually called my office before you came here to testify, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
One of the things you said during that conversation was, well, Mr. Robinson, how would the situation change if I were to be a witness for your side? Remember saying that?
No, I don't.
Burns and Rafay also had a near airtight alibi, something which the detectives considered to be just another facet of their meticulous planning. In the police theory of the crime, the boys had snuck out near the beginning of the movie through a curtain in the movie theater out a side door before going home and murdering the family. However, next-door neighbors independently came to the same conclusion that the murders had started before 10 o'clock. Both neighbors were interviewed the day after the Rafay family had been killed. The two neighbors on one side of the Rafay family residence said about 9:45, and the other neighbors said 9:56.
The neighbors who heard these sounds described them in great detail and verified what they were for the police, all heard them well before 10 o'clock at night.
The boys were seen leaving the restaurant very shortly before the 9:50 movie. It would be physically impossible for them to take the 7 to 10 minute drive, kill the family, shower, and then return to the movie theater. One of the neighbors, Julie Racky, had a very consistent nighttime routine and usually got in bed around the same time every single night. She pinpointed a window of time, quote, definitely before 10:15 and probably after 9:40, estimating that it was about 9:56 when she started hearing the loud banging sound. Detectives had her retrace the steps of her nighttime routine, down to the very book and chapter she was reading. When the reenactment ended and she reached the page she was on when she started hearing the murders, it was exactly 9:56. Eyewitness testimony is notoriously unreliable, which is why it is usually supplemented with other forms of evidence, and stronger eyewitness testimony is usually backed up by various people. After interviewing multiple people at all the locations Sebastian and Atif had gone to, not a single witness reported anything which contradicted the boys' stories. If that doesn't cause some level of reasonable doubt, it's hard to say what would. The prosecution's answer to this carefully gathered testimony, which runs counter to their case? They just must have been wrong. Prosecutor Conant went as far to suggest in his closing arguments that perhaps the Rafays had been murdered before the boys went to the movie theater, something which appears equally as impossible given that the neighbors and witnesses at the restaurants are correct. Another important point for the defense is that the boys didn't have a particularly strong motive to commit the crime. The state alleged that the reason the Rafays were murdered was so Atif and Sebastian could rake in life insurance and inheritance money, an act facilitated by their arrogance and willingness to disregard societal taboos via Nietzschean philosophy. If that sounds far-fetched, you're not the only one to think so. The crime seemed so hateful, so targeted, as if the culprit wanted to not just kill the family, but absolutely ravage their bodies. If you'll recall, Tariq Rafay had been bashed in the face many times when only the first strike was likely to be the lethal blow. It seemed to fit better with someone who had a deep personal grudge against Dr. Rafay, something which ostensibly has never fit any witness statements about Atif. By all accounts, he seemed to love his parents, but self-admittedly did not like his sister. Which begs the question, why would the boys leave his sister alive? Proponents of the teen's guilt maintain that Basma Rafay would not be able to identify her killer, even after recovery, as she was autistic and nonverbal. However, this seems strange as reports indicate that she could function at a high enough level to communicate, even if nonverbally. If Basma had survived, it's plausible that detectives would have asked her to indicate if it had been Sebastian who attacked her, and the boys would be put behind bars as a result of leaving one of the victims alive. Of course, she died soon after the attack, and there was no chance to make this interview happen. Despite the lack of a strong motive, no one was able to think of any viable alternative suspects. That was until a few days after the murders, when calls started coming in to the Bellevue Police Department. Three separate informants, all considered to be trustworthy by other law enforcement agencies, gave info about other suspects with stronger motives. The first person brought to the attention of the Bellevue police was vetted by the RCMP. He told them that he had learned of a murder-for-hire contract that had been targeting an East Indian family that had moved from Vancouver and was living in Bellevue. This was the only one of the three tips which the police followed up on, ultimately concluding that it didn't need to be investigated any further. A second informant, sent by the FBI, gave even more detailed information.
The FBI contacted the Bellevue police and informed them that one of their informants had information about the Rafay murders and was going to come to the Bellevue Police Department and give that information. The FBI informant told them that he himself personally knew an imam who lived in the area who had ordered the murder of Dr. Rafay and his family. And he knew the two men that he says actually went and committed the murders. Then he went on to tell them that he was with one of those men, and the man opened the trunk of his car, and the informant saw a baseball bat. And because of the way this guy behaved, the informant drew the conclusion that that was the murder weapon. That was only a few days after the murders. The Bellevue police at that time did not know that the Rafays were killed with a baseball bat. Some months later, the Bellevue police, through sound recreations, determined that the Rafay family was murdered with a baseball bat. That's not a coincidence. And this FBI informant did not come to them with vague information. He gave them the names of the people that he believed were responsible for these murders. He gave where they worked. He gave their addresses. He gave phone numbers. He also provided them with photographs.
A third informant, sent by the Seattle police, told the Bellevue detectives that a terrorist group based in both Pakistan and America had been involved in the death of the Rafays. Various sources indicate that this same group was also involved in the death of a Pakistani family during the 80s, who were friends with Tariq Rafay's boss at Alpha Engineering. Thinking back for a moment to the initial police interviews, Atif had actually mentioned that the only suspects he could think of would be his mother's estranged Shia Muslim friends. Atif calls Sultana's former friends, quote, enemies of the family, and seems to indicate that his mother had ended the friendship over ideological differences and had a falling out. Additionally, Dr. Rafay was actually something of a public speaker who held cultural events, which is part of why he was so well known and respected in the community. As an engineer, he applied his rigorous and logical thinking to his faith. Dr. Rafay believed that the mosques in Canada had been built at an angle and were not actually facing the correct direction. As all Muslims pray towards the city of Mecca, he believed that Muslims should move their prayer mats to align with what he felt was true East. It's not a stretch to see how this could lead to fundamentalist members in the community being disillusioned with his teachings. Tariq Rafay was also the co-president of the Pakistani-Canadian Friendship Organization, along with his close friend Riasit Ali Khan. Khan would also be murdered unexpectedly in 2003, shot dead in front of his home in Vancouver. No suspects were ever arrested, and the case remains open to this day. Khan was one of Atif Rafay's only visitors as he awaited trial. Could it be the very portrait of malice, a member or members of the local community, perhaps with ties to a larger organization, were lingering among the crowd gathered to hear Dr. Rafay speak? A friend, an acquaintance, a stranger, or perhaps a mixed group of the above? Either way, no hard evidence has ever been found to prove that Dr. Rafay had religious enemies. But given all the circumstantial evidence, you may be starting to come around to the idea that Sebastian and Atif might really be innocent. And you wouldn't be the only one. In addition to Sebastian's lawyers, 3 separate Innocence projects believe the boys to be falsely incarcerated. Innocence International at Tufts University, Idaho Innocence Project at Boise State University, and Pacific Northwest Innocence Project. All of which, according to Ken Klonsky, head of Innocence International, believe Atif and Sebastian to be 100% innocent. As you're watching this video, a question may have started to form in the back of your mind. If there was no evidence besides a few strange comments and a demeanor which seemed off, why would the Bellevue police, and even stranger, why would the federal government of Canada launch an investigation aimed at the 2 boys? In early 1995, 3 agents of the RCMP met with Bellevue detectives, looking over the case files for a week. Something which stood out to the RCMP agents was the cache of various emails stored on Atif's hard drive. The data of who had sent and received each email had been lost, and all that could be gleaned was context clues. However, many of the emails were clearly between Sebastian and Atif. Oh yay. I'm more and more certain that being a criminal is the way for me to go. For one, I think I'd be good at it. I have an honest face. I'm not dumb. I'd be a conscientious criminal who believes in what he does. If I killed someone, it would never plague my conscience. I'd be a great criminal, I think, or assassin or something. We shall know nothing until we know whether we have the right to kill our fellow men. Here is an aphorism I wrote myself. I really like it. We often condemn criminals as being not fit for society, when it is precisely the noblest among men for whom no society is fit. Ever your friend, Atif. Perhaps the initial email shown could reference the fact that Atif was either soon to move out or cut contact with his parents, but given the circumstances, it should be relatively disquieting to any supporters of his innocence. The other emails affirm the prosecution's narrative that the boys believed in an interpretation of Nietzsche, which held that moral and societal laws did not hold true for superior individuals. It was those very emails that the RCMP took to a Canadian judge, allowing them a warrant to wiretap the boys' house, car, and phones, and believing that the murders had been planned in Canada, they then opened their investigation. Consider another detail, which may mean everything or may mean nothing. During the trial, one of Sebastian's exes from high school took the stand.
What was this comment that Sebastian Burns made that stood out at you?
He said, I want to try to kill someone one day to see how it would feel, because I think I would find it enjoyable.
Did you think he was serious?
He wasn't laughing, and he said it in a serious tone.
A one-line paraphrase of a sarcasm from a hippy-dippy 3 a.m. conversation 10 years ago, and I can't remember enough about it to defend myself against it.
The defense found evidence that she had made similar remarks, indicating that it may have been something akin to an inside joke. The judge prevented the jury from hearing her testimony regardless. Going back to the crime scene for a moment, one detail which has been interpreted in different ways is the fact that Sultana had been murdered while she was praying, and her shawl had apparently been placed over her head post-mortem, as she seemed to be facing away from her attacker, along with the absence of any forced entry into the house. It looks bad for the boys. If Sebastian and Atif were responsible, Atif placing the shawl over her head might be an example of psychological undoing, where a perpetrator of a crime wants to symbolically lessen the guilt of a murder they have committed against their target, usually a family member or partner. In one study in the Journal of Forensic Sciences, in a sample of 975 homicides, they found 11 cases of undoing, 1.1%. Methods of undoing involve the use of blankets to cover the victim's body, positioning the body, use of a bed or couch, washing the body, using pillows, as well as removing clothing and adding other types of adornments. But on the other hand, if the killers really had been fundamentalists present at many of Dr. Rafay's speeches, they may have known the family, and it wouldn't be too hard to think of a reason that there wasn't any forced entry at the crime scene. Also, consider for a moment the type of neighborhood that Somerset and Bellevue was. In every crime documentary, someone remarks that their neighborhood was, quote, just not the type of place where things like this happen. In this case, Somerset really was that type of neighborhood. There has always been low crime in Bellevue, and the killing of the Rafay family was the first recorded triple murder in the city's history. In short, is it really that hard to believe that the Rafays might not have always locked their front door? Even today, not everyone remembers to lock their doors, and in a safe neighborhood like Somerset, it's not out of the question. If fellow Muslims broke in and murdered the Rafays, the shawl and prayer mat have obvious religious significance.
Now we cut back to Sultana's photo. She was obviously murdered with the shawl over her head, facing east. I mean, if you ever want a red flashing light that said this is an Islamic fundamentalist-based murder, that's it.
The existence of the informants in and of itself is strong exculpatory evidence, but the confession tapes overplayed their hand to make it seem better than it was. Despite the episode making it seem like all three of the informants were talking about the same group, they weren't. The first informant indicated that Dr. Rafay was killed by members of a Canadian mafia family, which was investigated and determined to be false. The leaders of the group had died months prior, and the alleged hitman wasn't tied to any DNA at the scene. Dr. Rafay also had no connection to the group. The second informant did specify that Dr. Rafay had been killed for his religious beliefs and gave a long list of names, but he didn't name any specific criminal organization. Only the third informant named an international terrorist group. The confession tapes conveniently mashed all elements together and omitted parts that didn't match with the terrorist narrative. It is the opinion of this video that if Dr. Rafay was killed for his religious beliefs, it was likely by members of the local community and without the help of a multinational organization. That being said, in considering the extremist angle, one has to recognize the implausibility of such a scenario. How many times have you heard of religious extremists killing someone with a baseball bat, then showering off in the victim's bathroom before leaving? Religious extremists may be known for their brutality, but are generally pretty efficient in committing crimes. On the other hand, you know who thinks death by baseball bat is badass? Sebastian Burns. During high school, he was the lead in a play called Rope, about two 19-year-olds who kill a younger teen for fun. In the original script, the two boys strangle the victim. However, Sebastian requested that in their version, he be allowed to use a baseball bat as he found it more traumatic. Rope, the pursuit of murder as an act of morality, the perfect role for Seb. Read another one of Atif's emails. In the end, it seems there are very strong pieces of circumstantial evidence which point both towards and away from the two boys, leading to the aforementioned divide in which most people find themselves stuck on one side of a giant chasm, unable to bridge the ideological gap. There are many things to consider: the blood of unidentified people versus Sebastian's hair in the shower, the lack of any violent past versus Atif's disturbing emails, the multiple informants, the many witnesses, and the lack of any blood on the pair versus the boy's own words. The list goes on, but one thing is for certain, that Sebastian and Atif will likely spend the rest of their lives in prison. One final thing to consider before we wrap up today's video is the worldview of you, dear viewer. How much do you trust the police, the justice system, the ethics of a federal sting operation? How much do you value one's emotions and mannerisms in determining guilt? What we ask is that you take a look at both sides before coming to a firm conclusion. Thank you.
And in March of 1992, you got into a car collision, didn't you?
Yes.
You were driving your family car at the time?
That's correct, yes.
I mean, you hit a pole in a parking lot. Did you own up to it at the time?
No, I did not.
Albeit with this stupid little car crash. What you decided to do was to pick up the pieces of evidence that were at the scene of this collision. Am I right?
Correct.
You put those back in your car, am I correct?
Correct.
You took them to an entirely different location in North Vancouver, am I right?
Correct.
And you staged a scene in a parking lot, am I right?
Basically.
You manipulated the evidence to appear as though it was something that it wasn't. Am I right?
Yes.
And the reason you did that, sir, was so that you could say that this accident occurred while you were at the movies. Am I right?
Correct.
Sir, you weren't at the movies when that accident occurred, were you?
No.
Mr. Burns, the reality is what you said about doing was very similar to what you told Hazlitt you did in this case. Isn't that correct?
The difference is that the first one is a car accident and the second one is a homicide.
That's correct, Mr. Burns.